Throughout recorded history, there have been many famous littles. Little Caesars, Little Nas X, Little Jerry Seinfeld. Actually, I think technically Little Nas X is a Lil. Anyway, and now I present Little Larry. Okay, so you might be thinking Little Larry is just some random stupid name that I gave to a coffee table, and you're half right. Because while it is stupid, it's not random. And if you've watched the show for a while now, then you're probably familiar with the name Bad Larry, which is the name that I've always given to any of the sort of trapezoidal cabineted pieces that I've built in the past. In fact, I've already built 2 of them on this channel, and Sean built this desk. So then you might be wondering, why didn't we just name the piece Bad Larry Coffee Table? And I actually did at first. Kind of. I guess it was more of a working title. Here's the desktop icon to prove it. But as I thought about it more, I guess I just thought that it was too on the nose, and that maybe it was time to move away from the whole Bad Larry credenza, Bad Larry desk, Bad Larry coffee table sort of naming scheme. You know, let this guy be his own Larry. Alright, so in all of these shots, I've just been prepping all of my wood so that I can start putting things together. So let's cut to a quick animation so that you can see how all of that's going to happen, and then we'll start actually doing it. So this piece is going to consist of a trapezoidal cabinet, but instead of having 4 exterior panels, it's only going to have 3. And to make that possible, the open end is going to have this sort of T-shaped set of partitions. Then in the open area here, we're going to put another panel, which will kind of separate the front and back cubbies of the table. Not that it has a front or a back. But anyway, on this side, we're going to put 2 drawers. And then if we flip around, we'll put this small shelf on this side. Then going back around to the front, I guess the drawer side, we're going to put another floating shelf in this open cubby area. Then finally, on the underside, we'll add a simple base. So I don't know if seeing all of that makes this project seem simpler or harder than it actually is, but if you wanted my opinion, I'd say that this one is on the more challenging side. Compared with our other plans, especially those that are kind of cabinet construction based, I'd say that it's more challenging than Savato or Deskwire. But it's still definitely doable, and honestly, that's kind of a running theme with our plans. The intent is always to make something that's essentially a woodworking course, but where the end result is a piece of furniture. I believe in this one the exact quote was, "It is like taking a master class in carcass construction, except that in the end, instead of getting a crappy certificate, you get this coffee table." You get a coffee table. Anyway, so in terms of how challenging this project is, or more importantly to the question that we get a lot, which is, can I complete it? I think that really you can answer that question for yourself better than I can. But as we work our way through this video, what I'll do is try to point out what you need and what we'll show in the plans so that hopefully by the end, you can answer that question. Then on our website, I'm going to put more granular information like wood needs and all that good stuff so that if you're interested, you can check it out. And if you're not, we don't have to get bogged down by it here. Also, if you want an example chapter of what our plans are like, we actually uploaded one here, so I'm going to put a link to that in the description as well. So here I'm cutting in some dominoes for the mitered joints. So the first and most obvious question might be, do I need a domino? And no, you don't. So for these kind of trapezoidal cabinets, I used to sell them and the joints weren't reinforced with anything. And the same is true for both of the Bad Larrys that I built on this channel in the past. And while the domino will certainly strengthen the joint, it isn't really necessary for this piece since the bulk of the load's going to be carried by the partitions. I guess it's kind of the same reason that we're not concerned with strength on the open end, where there's literally no panel to support anything. In fact, you could take off this other side panel if you wanted, and the piece would still be fine. So really the maximum strength needed at this joint is strong enough to hold itself on, and that's really it. That said, there are two reasons that we included it here. First is for alignment purposes. Having dominoes or dowels or biscuits makes assembly slightly easier. You can think of it like having an extra set of hands. And the other, honestly, is because people who have dominoes like to use them, and they're probably going to want to do it for this joint. So we just wanted to show how we would use it in this situation. You know, being thorough and all that good stuff. Now, when it comes to something that you will need a way to cut panels vertically on a table saw. And to do that, we're going to cover how to build this simple jig. And the reason that you're going to need to is because this joint here consists of two bevels cut at what would be equivalent to tilting your saw blade to 52.5 degrees if you were cutting it the normal way on a table saw, which is impossible, at least on my table saw. So to get around that, we're going to tilt our blade to 37.5 degrees and then cut vertically instead of horizontally. Alright, so at this point our three exterior panels are ready to glue up, but before we do that, we need to cut in something to hold in all of our partitions. So again, you could use dominoes to do this, or dowels or screws, or really whatever you wanted, but here we're going to use a router to cut in some dados and grooves. And those are going to go here, 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 and here. Oh, and here. Okay, with all that done, we can start assembling things. And I'm a big fan of breaking assemblies down into as many small pieces as possible. So we're going to start by gluing our first two partitions together in this sort of T shape. Then from there, we can attach the side panel to our bottom panel. And in the plans, we'll show how you can make these clamping blocks that are specifically designed for these particular joint angles. But anyway, by the time we got those on, our first sub-assembly was dry enough that we could install it on the bottom panel. Here we're doing a quick dry fit to make sure that our top panel would fit nicely onto everything. But before we glued it on, we needed to make the panel that's going to go behind our drawer boxes. So to do that, I'm starting off with an oversized panel, and I'm going to need to cut an angle on one end to match the side of the carcass. So I'll do that with this crosscut sled, which for me is probably the fastest way to get it done. That said, you could use a track saw or a circular saw, or even make your own temporary sled for use on a table saw, like you see Sean using in this shot. And for this one, it's more like a panel within a frame, so it's just going to get fit in loosely, as in no glue. So once we had it sized right, we could set it in and then put on our top. And then finally, we could install the open side shelf. All right, the next thing that we need to do is make and install these drawer boxes. So in these shots, I'm just cutting our rough material down into some slightly oversized chunks. And now I'm going to pass you over to Sean for a second. And you guys are in for a treat because he's going to share his super secret tip for making foolproof, perfect boxes every time.
Thanks, Chris. You guys are in for a treat because I'm going to share my super secret tip for making foolproof, perfect boxes every time. So, the first secret is to take some wood.
Sorry to interrupt. I almost forgot to thank SimpliSafe for sponsoring this video. So SimpliSafe makes home security systems that are easy to set up, intuitive to use, and that make sure your home is safe. And they do this by covering your home comprehensively, both inside and out, thanks to products like their video doorbell and cameras in unison with glass break sensors and everything else that they offer. You can order it online or over the phone. It gets delivered right to your house, and you can get it set up in less than an hour. And from there, your home's being professionally monitored 24/7, and if anything happens, they make sure that the police get called. We've personally had our system for over 2 years now, and it's been fantastic. We started off with window and door sensors, glass break sensors, cameras, and the basics, and have since expanded to include the video doorbell and the SimpliSafe lock, which has been really cool. It does things like verifies that our house is locked using a timer and lets us keep track of who comes and goes and even set unique codes for special circumstances. So if you've been thinking about getting a home security system, or even if you have a system that you think could be better, you owe it to yourself to give SimpliSafe a look. They have fair, honest prices with no hidden fees and no contracts, so you can opt out at any time. So put a system together and see if it's the right fit for you. All right, thanks SimpliSafe. Now let's get back to Sean.
Secret tips for making perfect drawer boxes every time.
Wow, those were some awesome tips. Great stuff, Sean. All right, I'm going to level with you. Sean didn't really have any good tips for building boxes. So just to bring you back up to speed, the only thing of note to know here is that we have 2 boxes that are slightly different widths. Now, in the past, whenever I made these angled cabinets with drawers in them, I would do it by placing a partition all the way to the inside of the bevel. So that way I had 2 parallel faces to attach drawer slides to. And on this desk, Sean made a couple little spacer blocks so that he could attach the drawer slides to those. But for this one, we decided to make our own wooden slides. Now, we're going to go into it in a lot more detail in the plans. In fact, there's a chapter on just this that's probably as long as this entire video. But once you wrap your head around it, it's really not that hard. And in fact, in some ways, it's actually easier to get a perfect fit when comparing it to making slides for a regular rectangular box. Here's why. So with a rectangular box, if you were making slides like this, you'd have one shot to perfectly size the thickness of your slides. Otherwise, they're going to get too tight or too loose. But with a trapezoid, or I guess this isn't really a trapezoid, so with a quadrilateral like this, as long as you're in the right ballpark with the thickness of the slide on the right-hand side, you can get a perfect side-to-side adjustment by slightly altering the height of the box. Think of it as kind of wedging it in until it's exactly as tight as you want it to be. And then because there's plenty of wiggle room within the opening for where the boxes live, you can actually be pretty inaccurate and still get a really good fit and a really nice operation on the drawer box. All right, now I really am going to hand you over to Sean for a minute to talk about the drawer faces and this little shelf that's going to go on the back side.
All right, let's try to make up for missing out on some of my super secret awesome tips about drawer box making and talk a bit about making drawer fronts and little shelves. Drawer fronts are one of those things that I kind of go back and forth on. On one hand, I like the piece as a whole to be the focal point. I don't really care if any one particular thing shines the most. But then on the other hand, drawer fronts are often just a big open space that are begging for some embellishment or details. So what often happens is I try to find that happy medium, and I think we did that in this case. So far you can see that I've set up a sled to cut the angle on one end of each drawer face, which is basically the most important part. Because once I have that angle dialed in, it's just a matter of trimming the drawer face to fit the space. So a quick rip to cut it to width, then a couple cuts to dial in the length, and it was good to go. A few business cards around the edges verifies that all my gaps are even, and I can repeat the exact same process for the top drawer. You can see here that I found a nice grain match between the two drawers, and we didn't want to do too much with the pulls, so we opted for simple cutouts. I needed a quick template to duplicate the pulls on both drawers, so instead of going to the CNC, I went old school. With the template ready to go, it was just a matter of taking a few passes with a template bit in my router, then a quick chamfer on the back side of the cutout, and the drawer fronts were ready to be attached to the drawer boxes. A few screws in the front panel of the drawer boxes, and using my business cards again to keep everything spaced properly, and we were in business. Now that the drawers were in place, all we needed to do was put the small back shelf in place, and we were getting pretty close to being finished. This little shelf just needed the matching angle cut onto one end and cut to length to land where we wanted it to, which was pretty much centered vertically in this space. It pretty much wedged itself in there, but for a little extra security, I added a couple angled support blocks. In order to make it as inoffensive as possible to look at, I cut them with a matching bevel to the side of the cabinet, as well as a bevel on the front side, then glued and nailed them into place. Pretty easy and seamless, just like this transition back to Chris. Can we take it again? Back to Chris. 3, 2, 1, back to Chris.
All right, so if I'm being honest, I probably put too much thought and work into this base because it's one of those things that you almost can't even see unless you were to have your head on the ground.
Oh yeah, now I can see it, yeah.
All that said, the base is still pretty important for these two reasons. First, it gives the piece a floating off the ground quality, and second, it sets the ultimate height of your table. So here I'm making myself more rough, oversized chunks, and in this case I want 3 pieces. 1 for my long base piece, and 2 for my short base pieces. So once I have things cut to rough size, just leaving them a little bit too long at this point, I'm going to start cutting in some half-lap joinery. And to get these joints sized perfectly, we're going to use the drill bit technique that we've covered in other videos, and that we'll cover more thoroughly in the plans. But just to quickly cover it again here, assuming that you have a table saw blade that's 1/8 of an inch thick, which is pretty standard, we're going to also grab a 1/8 inch drill bit that'll match that width. Then we're going to get one of our workpieces and a stop block, and with our crosscut sled, we'll use the workpiece and a spacer to establish our first cut. Then if we remove the workpiece and use the stop block to cut again, we would end up with a half lap that's exactly the width of our blade too wide. So we're going to need to space it with something that's 1/8 of an inch, which, as you've probably guessed by now, is the 1/8 inch drill bit. Okay, so that's the theory. Now let's actually mark it all out and cut it. Okay, to attach the base to the cabinet, we're just going to use a few screws countersunk into the base from the underside that go into the bottom of the cabinet. And for this, you could use a handheld drill if you prefer. I'm sure you could keep it straight enough that it would work. But if you don't trust yourself, a drill press would be a good solution. That said, I was too lazy to pull out our drill press, so I used this portable drill guide from Rockler. And I'll say that this is one of those things that when I first got it, I didn't think that I would use it a ton, but I've actually been using it quite a bit, and it seems like the drill press has just been collecting more and more dust lately. Now, I'm not saying that this is everything that a drill press is and more. Maybe I'll give my full thoughts on it in a different video, but I'll just say that it's pretty handy. All right, at this point, the open end of our cabinet is still too long. So that's the next thing that we need to take care of. And this is really more of an aesthetic situation than a technical one. That is to say that any dimensions you cut this to are going to work the same functionally. So you're really just trying to eyeball it so that things look right. And this is one of those instances in woodworking where I'm actually going to have the look supersede any particular dimensions. And if anything, I'll just use those dimensions as a sort of jumping off point. Okay, so getting back to the question of what you'll need to complete this project. Honestly, I'm sure that somebody more skilled than me could do it with a much more modest stable of tools. But generally speaking, if you want to do it roughly the way that we did it, I'd say you're going to want a table saw, a track saw or a circular saw, a router, drills and sanders and all that little stuff. And then if you're using rough wood, a joiner and a planer, and really, that's about it. At least in terms of the major tools. Really, there's nothing that we used beyond what we showed in this video, and even then, a lot of that was optional. So is it challenging? Depending on your current skill level, sure. But is it doable? Definitely. And like I said in the beginning of this video, our goal for each of these sets of plans is to be like a woodworking course, only where you end up with a specific piece as a result. So even if you bought one tomorrow and couldn't immediately build the piece, you'd still find value and could gain a ton of knowledge and then eventually work your way up to being able to build the piece. So if it interests you, but maybe you think it's a little too intimidating or just beyond you at this point, don't let that stop you. You know, I used to always like to get philosophical or try to say something inspirational at the end of my videos, and it's been a minute, so I might be a little rusty, but here goes. If you only try things that you're currently capable of, then you'll only ever be as good as you are right now. So don't let who you are today limit who you could be tomorrow. In other words, don't dress for the job you have, dress for the job you want.
Why are you wearing that?
I have an interview later. Special thanks to all of my Patreon members for helping me to make these videos possible. In addition to the good vibes that you'll get from supporting the show, at different tiers you also get things like field notes booklets, a t-shirt, and even discounts on plans. So if you want to find out more about how you can support the show, check out the link in the description, and as always, no pressure. Also, if you're interested in the plans, go check those out or watch the example chapter. All right, we'll see you in the next one.